Go to Ambassador John Sullivan, our ambassador to Russia, joins us right now out of Moscow. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us. Your take on this latest wave of Vladimir Putin. Now, he says it has nothing to do with what he claims was not a Ukrainian sinking of that second Russian battleship, but penetration on the part of Ukrainian forces daring to go inside Russia for attacks. I guess it doesn't work the other way around, but what do you make of all of this?
Well, first of all, thanks, Neil, for having me. It's a pleasure to be on with you today. Yeah, I think this is President Putin doubling down on his war of aggression that we've seen across Ukraine litter cities with casualties and mass atrocities. I think the fact that Ukraine was able to sink the flagship of the Russian Navy's Black Sea Fleet is caused severe embarrassment. Even worse, I mean, it's very difficult for the Russian government, which controls the narrative here, to keep that type of catastrophe from the Russian people. And it is a catastrophe. You look back in history when major warships have been sunk or attacked, whether it was the HMS Hood in World War II, the General Belgrano at the start of the Falklands War, the Argentine cruiser, our own ships, the Cole, the Stark, that were hit in the Stark in 1987, the Cole in 2000. These are significant events that will impact Russia, the Russian people, Russian morale, and I think we're seeing a reaction by the Russian government to that.
You know, Ambassador, you know Moscow very well. Of course, you were in this post under President Trump. President Biden wanted to keep you there. And I'm curious how the Russian people are reacting to all of this. We're told that they get very little information, but they're obviously familiar with the economic hit that's very real in Russia. What is the mood like there, just among the Russian people?
So first, my perspective is limited to Moscow. Unfortunately, because of actions that the Russian government has taken against our mission, we no longer have consulates in the largest country in the world, which is the Russian Federation. So, but in Moscow, what I can tell you is it's definitely a tense environment. People are very aware of the economic sanctions, export controls, and the general shunning of Russia by the global community. What we're seeing, however, is I think there is a delayed impact of the sanctions and the export controls. The Central Bank of Russia, for example, has gone to extraordinary lengths to try to prop up the ruble temporarily. But there's this lurking sense here that it may be April, but winter is coming again. And that's the full effect of the sanctions and export controls, which are going to be devastating, already have been, but make it even worse here, economic life in Russia.
You know, Ambassador, the Kremlin has, and that is Vladimir Putin, has been warning Finland and Sweden, toying with the idea of joining NATO. Finland seems to be very close to doing exactly that. That would be a mistake. It was a clear threat, even intimating the use of nuclear weapons here. What do you make of that? And if Finland were to go ahead and join NATO, what Vladimir Putin would do?
Well, we saw what Vladimir Putin did when Ukraine sought to join NATO. So I think it's difficult to overstate the risk that's presented. President Putin launched an aggressive war, and the Russian military is committing atrocities in Ukraine because an independent country led by a democratically elected president had the temerity to decide for its own purposes that it wanted to join NATO. With respect to Sweden, Finland, or other countries that want to join NATO, the United States has been clear, the NATO allies have been clear, that NATO, as a defensive alliance, is open to applications for countries who want to join. Those applications will be reviewed. And you've heard favorable comments by the current Secretary General of NATO on potential applications by Sweden and Finland. What I'd say is the United States, the NATO allies, are not going to be intimidated by Russia and decide that we are going to change the open door policy of NATO that has served us so well over decades. And we are not going to succumb to those type of threats.
So, Ambassador, when Vladimir Putin warns the U.S. to stop arming Ukraine, of course, we've been arming Ukraine, and we've upped the way and the type of equipment we're providing Ukraine. He hasn't done anything in response to that, just like he hasn't gone after some of these other European countries, particularly NATO members, that have been supplying and providing weaponry for Ukraine, even though he said that would be tantamount to being a factor in the war, a participant in the war. Do you think his bark is a whole lot worse than his bite, and that he actually says one thing but could barely do anything?
Well, I wouldn't underestimate what the Russian government under President Putin's leadership is capable of. We've seen that in Ukraine. We've seen that in the atrocities that have been committed, the horrific missile attack on the train station at Kramatorsk. Russian threats need to be taken very, very seriously. Having said that, President Biden has been quite firm in our commitment to our NATO allies, our Article 5 obligation, and we are going to protect our NATO allies, NATO territory to the maximum extent possible, to the maximum extent the United States can. We're also committed to Ukraine, not with the same type of treaty commitment, but President Biden has been quite explicit in the support, militarily, economic, humanitarian support that we're going to provide to this democracy that is under siege, as your reporter showed us today, under siege, its capital city, under siege by Russia. And it's kind of hard to think about that, right? Hard to really wrap your mind about it. In 2022, we have a capital city in Eastern Europe that is under siege in a way that we haven't seen since the Second World War. It's just horrific. So we can't underestimate Russia, but don't underestimate President Biden or the United States either.
Ambassador, are you surprised you haven't been kicked out of Russia? No offense to you, sir, but what you say and you're telling us, and you're still there. You're still in Moscow. They have not kicked your fanny out.
No. Well, first I'll say from my conversations with the president and with Secretary Blinken, there's no intention for the United States to remove me or to close our embassy. The Russian government itself has made threats to cut diplomatic relations with the United States.
Right.
The former president of Russia, former President Medvedev, who's now the deputy head of the Russian Security Council, said some weeks ago that Russia should padlock all the embassies here, and that Russia and the West should look at each other through gun sights and binoculars. His words, not mine. So that threat has been made. I think it's a recognition, Neil, frankly, by the Russians, that it's important for the United States, even in the worst of times, to continue to be able to communicate, to have an ambassador here in Washington, to have the Russian ambassador American ambassador in Moscow, Russian ambassador in Washington, to maintain that communication, most importantly, when the situation is as dire and as tense as it is now.
Ambassador, thank you very, very much. Hope that door remains open for you. One of these days you're going to try it. It's just not going to open. Ambassador John Sullivan, the U.S. ambassador to Russia. Very good seeing you, sir.